Hi there, and my promise to you today is that I don't do any silly sounds anymore. Like I admit that I'm a clown, but my pedagogical view on here is that you remember better something said by a clown than by a serious lecturer. So that's my point in the previous lectures. And now what we will do in this lecture, we will embark a very serious journey, no strange voices, and we will look into the behavior of a human eye and how it behaves from the optical point of view. So let's look what kind of strange components we could imagine a human eye to consist of. And we will learn about how the eye focuses. So basically we will learn how it accommodates. And this is the process that helps us on imaging things that are at a changing object location from our eye. So this is the process of accommodation. A lot of imaging is also taking place in real life when we are thinking about it. So I would guess that most of us are looking at things many hours a day. So subsequently, a lot of imaging will be done. And if you're thinking, for example, about the muscle work that are being needed to kind of guide the eye vision to focus on right parts of the total field of view, I think it's quite mind-boggling. And incidentally, this is what I learned from the Guinness World of Record with my kids a few weeks back, is that the muscles in our eye taking place, being in charge of the eye accommodation, they are the fastest muscles in our body, so that they actually operate on a few millisecond time scales. So that's a fun fact. And then finally, we will speak about some different vision problems, because they are very common problems, unfortunately, and that also helps us to understand better of the different types of imaging processes that take place that are associated with the human eye. Well, I would say that it's just a single process, but the different aspects of this imaging process that takes place in a human eye. So just a single imaging process, that there are many different aspects that we should look into it. So this is what I will be speaking about, and I will now embark on the journey like I promised, and it will be a serious one. No alien voices or nothing. So let's look shortly of the motivation. I would say this is a very common knowledge to really understand how a human eye behaves. So this also helps us to understand how we could make optical instrumentation. That would be one motivation, but also it's a kind of common knowledge, or it should be common knowledge, so that maybe it's good for you to pay attention. And this is roughly the kind of eye we imagine consists of. And this is a kind of schematic. It's a rough schematic, but nevertheless, from the kind of optical point of view, this is adequate for our description. And please note that we're looking at the mammalian vision. It's actually quite a complicated imaging processing that takes place inside our brain, so that the kind of what we think we are seeing is actually not exactly what the eye is seeing, but a lot of imaging processing is taking place, signal processing. So for example, as an example, an eye essentially it behaves like a single lens element imaging component, so that the images that are being formed by the human eyes, they in fact are inverted. But in the kind of how we are doing it, we are naturally always thinking that everything is the right way around. So in a way, the human brains have been accommodated to the fact that their things work like they do. And this is intrinsically encoded into the kind of processing of our signals. Okay, but these considerations, of course, of what kind of image processing actually takes place inside mammalian brains, like this is beyond our core scope. But I would like to point you, if interested, to kind of look into there and think into there, like what kind of implications they have and what interesting is there, because there's actually quite a different mammalians out there, and depending on their eyes, they might behave slightly different. So for example, the color view, like it's not granted, not every animal on globe has a color view, and so forth. And some animals are also seeing at UV wavelengths, especially insects. And I think reindeer is another example that actually sees UV light. I don't know why, but I think that is the case. I maybe some food stuff that the reindeer must scavenge somehow is being more like easy to see if your eyes sensitive to UV vision. I don't have a clue, honestly, but it's a curious fun fact also. But these considerations, all of this is beyond our scope, but you should also have a look on the Wikipedia and waste a few hours of your life in reading stuff about that. What we do here is we will only consider human eye, and we will only consider the human eye from the optical point of view. So basically just how rays of light will be propagating through the eye, and what are the main considerations that we should look at. What, for example, can degrade the performance of the eye, or what are being affected when we are looking at the imaging process. So let's look at the schematic, and let's look at what are the kind of different components that we have, what are the different portions or parts of eye that is being formed. So first we have the cornea, and this is the starting point. The rays of light first propagate through the cornea, and that's incidentally where most of the refraction of light takes place, because that's where we have the largest contrast of refractive indices. We have the ear and the cornea interface, and that's where most of refraction takes place. Then the second component will be the pupil, and this is basically surrounded by the iris, and this is the kind of colorful thing that we see with like mostly when we are looking at the eye of another person, so that this is actually just a kind of a blockade that restricts the rays of light of propagating through the lens, so that the iris really adjusts the amount of light propagating through the eye. So in our terminology from few lectures backwards, the iris is in fact acting as an aperture in our imaging system, known as the eye. So the lens then afterwards is the one that is being fine adjusting the propagation of light inside a gel-like vitreous humor. That's mostly a homogeneous mass of a transparent material, and eventually the light is being detected at the retina and at the macula at the center of the retina. And this is where the fovea centralis, the location where the sharpest vision takes place, is being located. And like I said, the light is mostly being refracted at the ear-cornea interface because the index contrast there is the strongest. So basically, that's where most of refraction takes place. And then this component known as the lens is only doing fine adjustment. And we will shortly see and learn that this is known as the accommodation. But most of the lens power actually is in here, responsible of the ear cornea interface is responsible for most of the power of the lens when thinking of our human eye as a single lens. And of course, the actual component known as the lens is only just adjusting, doing some fine adjustments into the lens power. And how human eyes form sharp images, this is basically like a very interesting process. And now the interesting thing here is that our human eyes, most of the time, are very good at imaging both distant, far away objects as well as objects that are nearby. And how we can do this is that essentially, from the optical point of view, the eye is changing its effective focal length, and thus we can actually image different objects quite nicely into the same location at the retina. And this process is known as the accommodation of the eye. And how things go, and when things work right, that when the object is far away, then the eye should be relaxed. And this is the kind of main kind of condition we should memorize ourselves. So that when the eye is looking far away, then the eye muscles are not doing any extra work, and this is what our eyes can very easily keep this condition for a long time. But when we want to image objects that are closer by, then we actually do work with the muscles, and this is that in the longer run starts making it more difficult. And this is a consideration we must remember when we are thinking of and designing of optical instrumentation, where we are actually using human eye to look at things. And the size of the iris, and this is the most colorful piece of a visual piece of our eyes. This is the one that acts as an aperture, or more sophisticatedly put, it acts as an aperture stop, and basically acts as a variable diaphragm for the eye. So please remember also that. So depending, are we on a bright sunlight conditions, then the iris, the aperture stop will be smaller, so that less light actually goes through and is being used to image. And then when we are in a darker location, then the iris gets bigger. And the actual vision perception is being made by rod cells and the cone cells, and they are being located at the retina. And there, the rod cells are the ones that sense the intensity of light, but not its color. This is also a very interesting fact. And this, in fact, enables us to see in night. And maybe you know, we have a so-called night vision that when we are spending a longer time in dark conditions, our human eye actually accommodates into this condition so that the iris gets larger, more light goes into the retina, and then in addition, these rod cells also activate chemically more, and then we're seeing a better after a while. This is incidentally also a very interesting process, as everything that we are going through in our course. And then there are cone cells, and there are 3 different types of cone cells, and both of these, all of these cone cells, sense both intensity of light and the coloration of light. And this is done by photoopsins, the molecules. And this is what enables us to see color. So that we have different kind of cone cells, they register slightly differently, different colors, and then the human eye magically is being transforming this information we are getting into a color image. And depending on different kind of animals, that the eye works slightly differently, so that there's lots of interesting stuff to read on and learn on if you're curious and you have extra time. But that's not in the scope of our course. The farthest point into which we can focus with our eye, this is known as the far point. And then how we can figure that out, basically when we are having an eye that behaves ideally, then the far point should be essentially at infinity. But in practice, we may not always be able to see crisply anymore, as far points as we might wish to. So we might have some kind of a vision problem, and then the far point might in reality be somewhere closer by. And this is what I'm trying to highlight with these 2 different figures. In an ideal eye would behave such a way that the far point of our eye would essentially really be at an infinitely far away from the eye, but in practice it might not be the case. And this is problematic because we will not anymore be able to see sharp images, form and sharp image of an object that is being located at the location that is further off than the far point of our specific eye. So this is the issue here. And similarly, there's a nearest point that our eye can focus into so that our eye can form a sharp image, and this is unsurprisingly known as a near point. And the problem here is that we have vision problems, and they are relatively common, and they, of course, thus motivate us to consider what are the most common vision problems and how they relate to these different concepts. So basically how we can take use of far point, the concept of far point, and the concept of near point to understand the vision problems. This is the kind of motivation and the logic in our lecture here. So let's, for example, look at the near point. And when that becomes more distant, when we grow old, this is what's happening. Especially, I can tell from my family that my spouse is definitely having her near point becoming more distant, and almost like every day we were seeing that to happen. So that that definitely takes place when we are growing older. I haven't seen it with my own eyes that much yet, but I'm a young guy. Maybe in a few years I will start seeing it. Another prime example of this phenomena is that if you have children, the near point of children can be extremely near to the human eye. So, for example, it can be as close as 5 centimeters from the eye. And this is not usually the case that we have with the adult eyes. And one student a few years back was pinpointing to me that there is some kind of like a nation or tribe, I think it was in Asia around, so that their children can actually see very sharply inside water. So that this specific bunch of people, they seem to have this kind of a generic preference of actually having very, very strong or very close by near point. And the kind of how the imaging process goes when you go to a different environment, so that when you're actually imaging underwater, then it actually would help out if your near point would be nearby. So that then these people, it seems to be that the small, young specimens of these folks, they are able to actually see sharply when they are diving in the water. So this is a fun fact also, and I think it's a nice point showing to us that there's actually quite a bit of variation in our biology, how we humans are behaving. And when we go older, then the near point actually goes further off, and this is what I'm seeing at the family too. So it can be as far as 1 meter away. We're luckily not there yet, but I would say maybe 40 centimeters is currently the number we're speaking here. So this is something we should also keep in mind, so that the near point changes and depends on the actual individual. And then let's go and go list and go through some of the vision problems that are out there. And let's start with the myopia, and this is also known as the nearsightedness. This is a very common vision problem, and this is the kind of problem is such that here the eye cannot really focus into far away objects anymore. And this is why it's called nearsightedness. And basically nearsightedness can be fixed quite easily by just using concave lenses. So essentially when we have the effective focal length of my lens to be negative, so that then what happens is that I will then take a point that would be far away, and since my eye, if I'm having a nearsightedness condition, then the far point actually will not be at the infinity, but let's say it could be actually surprisingly nearby. It could be even like in a, let's say, 5 meters away from the eye. And then what's happening is that we're using not sunglasses, but eyeglasses that are concave. And then the image formation goes such a way that when we have the object at infinity, this lens makes it seem that there will be an object in fact here at the far point. So essentially this lens is forming a virtual image at this location from an object point that is at infinity. And this is how these kind of eyeglasses are being designed, so that they change your real object into a virtual object here, and then when it's here or closer by, then the human eye can actually accommodate accordingly and then can form a sharp image. So that this is how they behave. And nicely enough, luckily enough, when we are looking at the far points that are closer by, then the human eye can really accommodate even when it's having myopia. So that this is then what's happening by just accommodation of the human eye. And let's now go through another example. Let's go through a hyperopia this time. So this is known as the farsightedness. So in this vision problem, it's the eye now having problems of looking at the nearby objects. So basically what the problem is that we now are wanting to transform the near point, and then like basically what happens in a hyperopia is that when we are looking at the nearby object, the eye is being focusing too strongly, so that the image that is being formed is not actually formed at the retinal plane and at the macula and the central fovealis, but rather behind it. So that this is what's happening. So that the eye just doesn't really accommodate properly. And this can be adjusted by then using a lens that has a positive power. So that they're using basically a convex lens. So that the focal length is a positive quantity. And now, as shown in the B figure, when we are using the lens, then the near point actually will be changed, and then now the eye can still accommodate. So that now when we have problems of not seeing clearly nearby objects, then we can actually move the near point to a different location where the eye can still accommodate accordingly. Of course, what we lose when we do this is that when we are putting the object further off, the magnification will decrease. So that at some point, it won't be as easy, for example, to read a book if you have hyperopia and you're using glasses. So that this is something that we cannot adjust by just using a single convex lens. And the lens powers, how they are usually designed, they are chosen such that the virtual image will be formed into the near point, and the near point roughly is around 25 centimeters when you have a healthy human eye away from the cornea. But when we grow older, then the near point will get longer. Already waiting for that. From the optical point of view, not from the kind of personal point of view. So upon aging, humans kind of suffer both from myopia and also from hyperopia, so that the hyperopia actually starts happening for many of us. And then the solution is to use both bifocal glasses. So these are also known as the varifocal glasses. So as the name suggests, we then have glasses where we have two different optical focal lengths inside the glass. So bifocal or varifocal glasses. And there, the magic here would be that you would have a location in your lens, bifocal lenses, that you would be able to look through this specific location and still be able to read something that is nearby. And then when you're looking at a far away objects, you're looking through a different portion of your glasses, and then you're able to see a sharp image of a far away object. And by the way, I have a colleague, at least used to be, the last time I saw him working in a kind of a young company, and they are making bifocal glasses based using, I think it was liquid crystals, so that they did not have any more different regions in the glasses, but rather they were just able to adjust the focal length of their glasses by just turning a knob or something in the eyeglasses at these outer rims. So basically, they were surprisingly cheap compared to the kind of conventional way of polishing bifocal glasses. And also, I think the advantage of that kind of glasses and technology would be that you wouldn't need to have a different specific location at your glasses through which you would need to look to be able to see objects that are nearby, but rather you can just easily adjust into the different scenario that if you need to look at the nearby objects, you would just be able to kind of easily look everywhere, so that you can enlarge in the field of vision or field of view, essentially, of your glasses. But that's as another branching out as a kind of example of the kind of current status of the technology that exists out there. In addition to these above vision problems we have described, there also is another problems, actually quite a few. For example, and I'm just listing a few examples here, one of the most common ones, like eyes, for example, they can suffer from astigmatism. And I have a picture showing what happens there. Is that here the rays of light propagating through the different portions of the human eye is actually focusing differently into the retinal plane. And subsequently, what happens is that the pictures become blurry, and these cannot easily anymore be corrected by just using a kind of simple spherical surfaces. So this is astigmatism in place, so that they kind of like a rays responsible of image formation along a different direction, they don't sharply form an image anymore. And then instead of seeing a sharp text meaning blurry, this is Finnish meaning blurry, you see something that could look blurry like this. So basically I'm just making the image blurry along the x-axis here, and then the other rays that will be propagating would be making a blurriness along the y-axis. And then the kind of best case scenario to fix this issue is that you cannot maybe get the kind of the sharpest image like this, but at least you can get the kind of rough optimal where you're minimizing these two different types of blurriness, and then you're getting the kind of least confusing image to look at. But astigmatism as a kind of vision problem, it's not a trivial thing to encounter anymore, because the kind of what happens actually in a human eye is not as something as simple as dealing with the near fields, near point and the far point, but rather the kind of how different types of rays propagate through the whole lens, known as the human eye. Then this is also quite interesting that during aging, the lens of the eye, so that's the kind of transparent mass inside, that can also become cloudy, and this condition is known as a cataract. And from the optical point of view, I think this is a very interesting process, so that we start with something that looks like a transparent material, and light propagates happily there. No kind of scattering centers are being placed. And then during aging, somehow the kind of protein configurations there, they start being changing. So there will be some kind of aggregation of proteins, and this kind of aggregation starts acting like a kind of a scattering centers. And then subsequently, the kind of image that we see becomes cloudy, because rays of light are not being propagating through a perfectly homogeneous transparent medium anymore, but rather slightly inhomogeneous medium. And that's where we are seeing a kind of blurriness. So this is, for example, exactly the same process that we would see when we would look through a piece of a glass filled with water, and then we will start gradually putting tiny droplets of milk into the water. We are quite quickly seeing that the water with the tiny few droplets of milk becomes opaque, cloudy, and we are not able to form a nice image anymore. So in a way, this is a similar process that is taking place when cataract hits us. And when we are thinking things on a big scale, on a global scale, cataract is really the most common reason for human blindness. So if you're looking at kind of like relevance of things, this is actually a huge thing on a global scale. And the symptoms basically are a gradual reduction of vision. And this is, of course, a huge thing from the people who are suffering from this. So that these are actually very important and serious things for some people. So this was my lecture on the human eye. I hope it was educating. And we will, in the next lecture that will be focusing on magnifying glasses, we will be looking at more on these concepts of the far point and the near point. And hopefully that also helps you to understand things a little bit more. But at least I hope after this you get the main points, that there are these kind of lots of terminology here, and the kind of human eye behaves basically by just accommodation. And it's actually surprisingly complicated yet simple optical instrumentation that we're using many hours a day. But I thank you for listening and patience, and please join me during my next lecture. Thanks and bye-bye.